3 years ago on this day, Governor J.B. Pritzker announced that he is closing indoor dining for restaurants, making that executive order. And that started a cascade of executive orders that we still have a disaster proclamation in place in Illinois because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Good morning. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY. Just a brief review here of the past 3 years because it's quite interesting when you look back at the history of this. And I think it's important for people to understand. Late February, there were news conferences from the governor. This is back in 2020. Late February, the governor and the public health director at the time, Dr. Ngozi Ezike, they held news conferences about, hey, we've got a positive case of this new coronavirus that's from China. It doesn't seem to be a direct impact to the public. The general public's not at threat right now. They said that multiple times. You can pull up those articles and have those. But then it seemed to flip with more concern about the spread and more positive tests and so on. But it ultimately led to the governor going on cable TV and announcing that he was thinking of having a mandate on restaurants to not allow them to have indoor seating. Here's what the governor said back on March 15th of 2020.
If you are young and healthy, listen up. We need you to follow social distancing guidelines too. You may only have mild symptoms for a few days and may think that you're just fine, but you can have the unintended tragic effect of spreading COVID-19 to others who may be more vulnerable. And unfortunately, we haven't seen a lot of movement. People aren't understanding that even if you're healthy, even if you're young, that you may be a carrier and you're going to hand it over to somebody else. COVID-19 is spreading because even healthy people can be walking around giving it to other people. So we need to go on lockdown.
I was just going to say, it sounds like then are you going to close bars and restaurants? That is your plan? Or you sort of contradicted yourself there saying you were going to keep the size smaller, but then you're making the case to lock down.
Well, what I'm telling you is that we've been on the trajectory now and planning for each of these steps because it's not easy. You can imagine each one of these decisions has consequences to them that are not just about the pandemic. They're also about people's livelihoods. So we're actually looking hard at that decision making today. We obviously saw what happened in Europe. Nowhere in the United States really has there been a lockdown on bars and restaurants, but it's something that we're seriously looking at.
So again, Governor J.B. Pritzker on March 15th of 2020 on national news saying that. And then the following day, he went ahead and he made that announcement. And here's that tape from 3 years ago. Today, Governor J.B. Pritzker announcing that he was ordering all restaurants and bars to cease and halt indoor dining out of fear of spreading COVID-19.
All bars and restaurants in the state of Illinois to close to the public as of the close of business Monday night, March 16th through March 30th. We are working with restaurant owners and food delivery services across the state to see if restaurants can safely keep their kitchens open so the restaurants can continue food delivery to people at their homes. Additionally, we are allowing drive-through and curbside pickup for restaurants to serve the public over this period. We are working with restaurant owners in this effort.
So Governor J.B. Pritzker, again, saying that there's concern about asymptomatic spread, and that's why we needed to close these things down. That was March 16th, 3 years ago. And then a few days after, he announced a stay-at-home order, which impacted what he declared as non-essential businesses. And we saw, for instance, all the Walmarts in Illinois could stay open, selling groceries and shoes and hardware, but the small mom and pop shoe store couldn't stay open. We saw that gun stores and cannabis stores, which was just made legal, cannabis in 2020, those could stay open. But again, the small craft store down the streets couldn't stay open to the public. So what happened to employment after that? And then you get these schools that were told that they couldn't allow for in-person education, and then you lead to the vaccine mandates and then the continued tweaking of business regulations. And still to this day, 3 years later, we have monthly consecutive executive disaster proclamations coming from the governor's office. Those are expected to be lifted May 11th. But how do we do after all that? Are we back to normal? Do we have full employment again in Illinois? We'll take a look at that next. And also a moment from last night where State Representative Adam Niemerg, he wanted to make sure that there was at least some accountability for the Illinois Department of Employment Security Director, who's now the director of the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, about unemployment fraud. So we'll get to that next here on WMA. All right, just doing a brief review of 3 years after Governor J.B. Pritzker announced that no indoor dining. He also, a couple of headlines here from back in the day. Pritzker bans gatherings of more than 50 people for 2 months as COVID cases surpass 100. Pritzker announced first Illinois death from COVID-19 on March 17th of 2020. So those are some of the things that happened 3 years ago. But reflecting back on this, I asked Governor J.B. Pritzker earlier this month if he has any regrets from the decisions he deployed in managing COVID-19.
It's funny, it's easy to look back and say, if I knew then what I know now, would I have done something differently? I'm sure that's true about almost anything that we might talk about, that any of us would look back and say, is there something different I might have done if I knew then what I know now? So, there are all kinds of things like that. I've been asked this question before. I think about it.
And he ended up saying that one of his biggest regrets was maybe he didn't mandate masks earlier, claiming that mask mandate saved thousands of lives. But this is why we look back at these things, because there's still unanswered questions, especially how much fraud there was in the Illinois Department of Employment Security with the spike in unemployment, which at one point was more than 1 million. We still haven't rebounded from all of the unemployment that we had. Still shy about 40,000 jobs. Here's State Representative Adam Niemerg questioning the former Illinois Department of Employment Security Director, who's now the director of the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, last night at a House committee hearing.
You just assumed this new agency here in January.
Correct.
And why would you not still be with IDES to be able to answer the questions that I may have and others may have on the last 2 years for accountability?
I was asked to move into this agency. It's a sister workforce agency, and I'm very happy to work here and work with all of you at the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. I did appear before this committee on previous occasions while I was in my former role at IDES. I believe that I have provided information on the size and scope of pandemic-related fraud in the unemployment insurance system across the country throughout the course of the pandemic. What we've experienced here in Illinois is not unlike what was experienced in any other state, and the United States Department of Labor, as last I left the agency in mid-January, is still working to quantify the number of fraud that was associated with the federal programs that were created in spring of 2020 in order to respond to COVID-19.
Okay.
If I may add, Representative, I believe they did complete an audit of IDS to try to quantify that amount. I think it was like $2 billion last thing I heard.
That was just the federal program, not the state program.
A lot of other questions. So just for the outside person looking in, it looks like you were moved from a failing department that you were director of to another department based on what had happened in the last 2 years.
I don't think that the Department of Employment Security failed whatsoever. In fact, the Department of Employment Security served as the economic first responder for the state of Illinois for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic.
That's definitely a difference of opinion.
And stood up 6 or 7 brand new pandemic-related programs in order to respond to the crisis.
Tell that to the family that almost lost their home.
We'll actually talk with State Representative Adam Niemerg this hour. Stay tuned. It's 7 o'clock.
From the Fly SPI studios, take the